guys, it's Gamer Ahmer here. So today we're going to talk about this awesome Nintendo 64 controller. This is by a company called Retro Fighters. Now some of you may know that this was actually launched on Kickstarter, and now they actually sell this controller off of their website. I'm going to go ahead and drop their links below on how to actually get a hold of these controllers. So this is the Brawler 64 gamepad for the Nintendo 64. So today we're going to go ahead and unbox this and check it out, along with some of these games here. So let's go ahead and take a look. You'll notice that we have this pretty sweet looking controller, which is a modern day controller for the Nintendo 64. And then it even comes with this quick start instruction manual. So if we take a look at this box, it says Retro Fighters Brawler 64 Gamepad. Introducing the Brawler 64 Gamepad by Retro Fighters, a completely redesigned Nintendo 64 controller with next generation features and attributes, providing a new and comfortable way to play your favorite classic Nintendo 64 games. The next gen style controller has a completely updated look over the original Nintendo 64 controller. The Retro Fighters Brawler 64 gamepad showcases a two-handle design and features responsive buttons, D-pad, and a comfortable analog stick. The Retro Fighters Brawler 64 gamepad offers a new way to play your classic Nintendo 64 games. So here, if we take a look at it compared to the original Nintendo 64 controller, you'll notice that there is a huge difference just by looking at it. So they aren't too different in weight, although this controller is a little bit lighter than this controller. But you'll notice that these C buttons are larger on the Retro Fighters controller, and the B and A buttons are with these over here still, the start button in the middle, and then you'll notice two extra buttons right here, the turbo and clear button, which really helps with some of these games. And then you'll notice that they actually switched around the joystick and the D-pad right there, and the D-pad is a little bit more sunken in on this controller as opposed to the original. And you'll notice that this whole joystick right here is completely redesigned, and it has a much more comfortable feel to it. On the original Nintendo 64, you notice that over time these joysticks are warped. This one has a completely redesigned joystick, and it is a lot more comfortable as opposed to these ridges on this original. And then if we take a look at the top here, you'll notice that we have these triggers, which are very similar on the top, but the Z button is actually up here now instead of on the bottom. And then you'll notice that there still is a spot for the rumble pack and the memory pack to fit right in here. So that is a pretty sweet option where you can go ahead and use pretty much all the same capabilities as this controller. And of course we don't have this unusual third handle right here. This is way more comfortable as it fits into your hands. This one is actually the newer release of this Retro Fighters controller. As some of you know, that when this first was released they had some issues with this up here, so right away it feels pretty comfortable and it doesn't feel like anything's getting in the way or defective. So if we just take a look at this quick start instruction manual, you'll notice when we open it up it says Retro Fighters is a new video game accessory manufacturer that produces unique and cutting-edge products exclusively for the gaming community. There's some thank you information on here. It says to play, simply plug your Nintendo 64 controller into the system and you are ready to go. The Retro Fighters Brawler 64 gamepad works with memory and rumble packs, but it is not compatible with the transfer packs. But that's not in a lot of the games, so that really doesn't make a difference for me. And it says to activate turbo mode, press and hold the turbo button and the button you wish to activate turbo to. The button will now be activated with the turbo function. To remove turbo, press and hold the clear button and the button you wish to return back to regular mode. So that's a pretty sweet option on here. And then of course they have some information on how to contact them and a special thanks page for those who backed the Kickstarter. So I was finally excited to try out this controller as I heard some great things about it, and after playing some of these games right here, this is my new go-to controller for the Nintendo 64. So first up, of course, we had Goldeneye for the Nintendo 64. These triggers come in handy when you play this game because you have to go ahead and focus on where you want to shoot. You can go ahead and zoom in. The functionality of this controller while playing this game is very nice, and it's a lot better than playing this controller. Now this game was a lot of fun growing up, and it's been a while since I actually played it, and especially if you've played on the more modern systems today, it's always pretty challenging to go back and play this Nintendo 64 controller as it just has an odd shape to it, and that's where a lot of the critics actually complain about with the Nintendo 64. They're always critiquing the design of this controller. So playing this shooting game on this controller was pretty awesome. It definitely has a pretty sweet design to it, which makes the functionality even better while playing this game. I really enjoyed the controls and buttons on here while playing Goldeneye, and you get used to this design pretty quick, whereas when you have to go back and play Goldeneye and other shooting games, you have to get used to holding this controller again, as it's pretty difficult going from the newer systems such as PlayStation and Xbox and coming back to this Nintendo 64 controller. So this was really helpful when I played this game, and it made it so much more fun. And then of course I tested out some shoot 'em up games. We had this Starfox 64 game, and this game had such smooth controls to it. It was really fun when I played with this controller as opposed to this one, and everything was just a lot more smooth when playing this game, and it just made me realize how much fun Starfox 64 was. And then of course with Starfox 64, testing out the rumble pack with this controller was really awesome. It really had a great feel to it, and I was a little skeptical at first since this is a third-party controller, but the rumble pack actually worked just fine, especially on this game. And then of course I wanted to try out this Star Soldier game that I have in my collection. So this is a pretty awesome shoot 'em up game. Not a lot of people talk about this game, so this is actually one of my favorite shoot 'em ups, especially on the Nintendo 64. This controller really had such smooth controls with it. These buttons are just so comfortable switching through it, as opposed to this original controller here, and this joystick and everything just make it glide even easier, and the controls are just so smooth and so comfortable, so I really enjoyed playing this. And then of course onto some fighting games. We have one of my favorites called Fighting Force 64. Now this game, you pretty much just run around and you fight against waves of enemies that just show up in the different levels. I really enjoyed this game as a kid, and I've gotten a lot better over the years. And of course, holding this controller while playing this game and going through different levels and what it seems like is endless enemies, this controller was very comfortable. It didn't actually hurt my hands as I played this game, and these buttons held up very well as I continuously punched and kicked and rolled in this game against the enemies that I encountered. So this was a lot of fun. And then of course, this controller was definitely made for Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64. I really love this game. I'll have to get some more controllers like this for when I have game nights and have some of my friends over and we all play Super Smash Bros. What I tend to always notice is that a lot of my friends actually complain about this controller, as they may have not actually played this system that much growing up, or maybe they just have played more modern day games. So this controller is pretty uncomfortable going back to, and this is a really fun game for the Nintendo 64, and this style controller really helps and contributes to this game. So I would definitely recommend getting this Retro Fighters controller, especially for the Super Smash Bros. It's always a classic to play, and everything just feels so smooth with all of the buttons on here, especially these Z buttons right here as opposed to on the middle and the back, which is a very odd placement for that button. And then on to another beat 'em up style game. We have this Killer Instinct Gold. Now this was a classic back in the day, and I really enjoyed this game on the Nintendo 64, especially all of the pretty awesome characters that are in this Killer Instinct game. I've always been a fighting style person, such as Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, and Killer Instinct, but I really enjoyed this one on the Nintendo 64, and just all the different combos and button mashing. It just made it even more comfortable on this controller, as back in the day I remember playing with this controller, how this joystick has these little ridges right here, and it just made it so uncomfortable growing up, and I'm pretty sure I even got some red marks and some blisters from this while playing a lot of the Nintendo 64 games. And of course it usually doesn't hold up very long, especially when you jam and play some Super Smash Bros. Or other fighting games. So I really enjoyed this joystick, as it felt really nice. This option right here with these little ridges and how it is just new and improved was very nice while playing a lot of these games. So as someone who loves the Nintendo 64, as I have a complete set of games for the Nintendo 64, along with pretty much every console variant of the system and controller variant, along with hundreds of controllers for the Nintendo 64, including variants and third-party controllers. I really love this Brawler 64 gamepad by Retro Fighters. So this controller really takes the cake out of all the Nintendo 64 controllers that I own. So this controller is pretty awesome. I highly recommend it. It's just so comfortable. It fits so well in your hands. The joystick alone, how it is reimagined and redesigned, it's just so comfortable while playing some of these classic Nintendo 64 games. The buttons on it are just amazing. It doesn't feel like a cheaply made controller as some of the third-party controllers are. This is just pretty awesome. This company, Retro Fighters, is so amazing. They even went ahead and added the Fantastic Controller collection to their page, where you can go ahead and order those as well. So when I have some game nights and have some friends over, they'll get to enjoy this controller as well, as opposed to this awkwardly shaped controller. So I highly recommend these controllers. I'm going to go ahead and drop their information below, where you can go ahead and order them and check them out. So thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. Go ahead and check out my other videos and stay tuned for more.